It is a personality structure organized around a profound, unbearable, almost annihilating sense of shame and emptiness at the core, covered over by a grandiose false self that must be defended at all costs. Everything the narcissist does, every charm offensive, every devaluation, every rage episode, every silent treatment, every rewriting of history, is in service of one psychological task, which is to keep that core self from being seen, felt, or known. And here is what almost no one explains clearly enough. Admitting fault, for a person with this structure, is not the mild social discomfort it is for the rest of us. It is psychologically catastrophic. It threatens to collapse the entire false self and expose the terrified, empty, shame-saturated core underneath. Neuroscientifically, we see this in the way their threat response system, the amygdala and associated limbic structures, fires at full intensity in response to even the mildest accountability. The same neural alarm the rest of us reserve for genuine physical danger. So when they are confronted with the consequences of their behavior, their brain does not process it as feedback. It processes it as a survival event. And the only way they have ever learned to survive is to externalize, to push the badness outward, to find a face to put it on, yours. This is why blame is not incidental to narcissism. It is structural. It is the load-bearing wall of the entire personality. If they let it fall, the whole house comes down. So they will hold that wall in place against every shred of evidence, every reasonable conversation, every appeal to memory or logic or shared history. They are not refusing to take responsibility because they are stubborn, or because they need more time, or because they had a bad childhood and need your patience. They are refusing because the architecture of their psyche cannot tolerate it. And once you understand this, something important happens. You stop waiting. You stop waiting for the apology that was never coming. You stop waiting for the recognition that their system cannot generate. You stop waiting for them to finally see you, because the seeing of you would require them to see themselves. And that is the one thing they have organized an entire life to avoid. Now let us talk about what happens when their carefully constructed life begins to collapse, because that is the moment you are watching from the outside right now. Narcissists build lives on extraction. They extract admiration, labor, emotional regulation, financial resources, social standing, and identity itself from the people around them. And for a while, this works. The charm is real enough to draw people in. The grandiosity is compelling. The intermittent reinforcement is biochemically addictive to those caught in it. But extraction is not sustainable. Relationships built on it erode. Partners eventually exhaust themselves and leave, or learn the truth and pull back. Colleagues see the patterns. Family members grow weary. The supply they depend on begins to thin. And because they have never developed the internal capacity to self-regulate, to self-soothe, to generate worth from within, the thinning of supply registers in their nervous system as existential threat. This is the collapse. And the collapse always looks for a cause outside the self. That cause becomes you, especially if you are the one who set the boundary, who stopped giving, who left, who simply went quiet and stopped performing the role they cast you in. Because in their internal logic, you were the regulator, you were the mirror, you were the source. And when you stopped, their world began to destabilize. And rather than face the truth that their own behavior drove you away and is driving everyone away, they construct a narrative in which you are the destroyer. You poisoned the well, you turned people against them. You are the reason their job is unraveling, their marriage is failing, their reputation is in question, their adult children will not speak to them. You, always you, even when you have not spoken their name in months. Even when you have done nothing but live quietly and try to heal. This is where karma actually lives. And I want to demystify it for you because the new age version of karma as cosmic justice has done survivors a disservice. Karma is not a mystical force keeping a ledger. Karma, in the way it matters here, is the natural and inevitable accumulation of real-world consequences for repeated patterns of behavior. When a person spends decades exploiting, manipulating, lying, betraying, and discarding the people closest to them, they are not getting away with anything. They are building a life that will eventually have no one in it. They are creating, with their own hands, the isolation, the financial instability, the chronic conflict, the failing health, the relational wasteland that defines the late stage of unchecked narcissistic pathology. The research on long-term outcomes for people with severe narcissistic traits is sobering. They tend toward depression, substance use, cardiovascular disease, social isolation, and what clinicians sometimes call malignant loneliness. A loneliness so deep it cannot be soothed because the person cannot tolerate the kind of intimacy that would dissolve it. This is not punishment from the universe. This is the mathematics of how they have lived. And as their life contracts, the patterns intensify. The smear campaign sharpens. Suddenly, people you have not heard from in years are looking at you strangely. Mutual friends drift away with no explanation. Family members repeat phrases that sound suspiciously like sentences you have heard come out of the narcissist's mouth. The flying monkeys arrive, sometimes well-meaning, sometimes complicit, sometimes simply confused, carrying messages, demands, accusations, requests for you to explain yourself. The hoovering begins, the random text on a holiday, the message about a shared memory, the sudden crisis they need your help with, the apology that is not actually an apology but a setup, the discovery that they have reached out to someone in your life to gather information. And the accusations escalate, because as their life worsens, they need a bigger villain to explain it. So what started as "you were difficult" becomes "you were abusive," becomes "you destroyed me," becomes claims so extreme and unrecognizable that you sometimes wonder if they are describing a different person entirely. They are. They are describing the projection of their own behavior wearing your face. I want you to hear me clearly now, because this part matters more than almost anything else I will say. What this does to your sense of reality is profound, and it deserves to be named. Being blamed for the destruction caused by someone else's choices is one of the most disorienting experiences a human being can have. It activates a specific kind of trauma response, sometimes called betrayal trauma, sometimes called gaslighting injury, in which the very faculties you would normally use to evaluate what is happening, memory, perception, judgment, intuition, become the things you no longer trust. You start checking your own memories. You start wondering if you were actually the difficult one. You replay conversations from years ago looking for evidence of your own villainy. You feel guilty for things you did not do. You feel ashamed of things you should be proud of. You feel small in a way that does not match the size of the person you actually are. This is not weakness. This is the predictable, documented, neurological aftermath of prolonged exposure to a person whose entire relational style was designed to keep you off balance. Your reality testing is not broken. It was attacked. There is a difference. And before I take you into the next layer of this, I want to pause and speak to you directly. Because if you are still here, still listening, still letting these words land, then something in you is doing the bravest thing a survivor can do, which is to stay present with the truth. Subscribe to this channel, not as a transaction, but as an act of belonging. There is a community of people gathering in this space, people who know exactly the experience you are living, people who have walked through the collapse and the smear and the hoovering and the strange, lonely middle distance of recovery, and come out the other side intact. Stay connected to this work. Stay close to voices that will not gaslight you, will not minimize what you survived, and will not ask you to be smaller than you are in order to be loved. The recovery from this is not a weekend. It is a slow rebuilding, and you deserve company on the way. Now, about defending yourself. I know the impulse. I know how it lives in your chest, how it wakes you at 3 a.m, how it makes you draft messages you never send, how it makes you want to gather your evidence and present your case to anyone who will listen. I want you to understand something clinically. Defending yourself to the narcissist or to their audience does not work, and it does not work for specific reasons. The narcissist is not engaged in a good faith argument. They are engaged in a defensive operation to protect the false self. Your facts, your evidence, your reasonable explanations are not data points to them. They are threats. And every time you engage, you give them three things they need: your attention, your emotional energy, and material to twist into the next chapter of the smear. The audience they have built around them is not a neutral jury. It is a carefully selected group of people who have been groomed, in some cases for years, to see the narcissist a particular way and to see you a particular way. Some of them are complicit. Some are conflict averse and find it easier to believe the loud, confident person than the quiet, wounded one. Some are themselves manipulable, often because they have their own unhealed wounds the narcissist has learned to exploit. And some, painfully, are people who simply cannot afford to see the truth, because seeing it would require them to reckon with what they tolerated, enabled, or participated in. None of these audiences are reachable through your defense. They are only reachable through time, through the narcissist's own continued behavior, and through the slow erosion of the false self under the pressure of reality. So how do you detach? You detach by understanding that you do not owe an explanation to people who have already decided not to see you. You detach by letting the narrative do what narratives do when no one feeds them. Eventually, they thin and fade. You detach by building a life so full of truth and meaning and real connection that the noise from the collapsing world you left behind becomes background, then echo, then silence. You detach by grieving. And let me name this grief, because it is the grief almost no one talks about. It is the grief of realizing you were never truly seen by this person, that the love you thought you were receiving was a performance calibrated to extract something from you, that the version of you they claimed to cherish was a useful fiction, and the real you was always, on some level, threatening to them. This grief is enormous. It is the grief of a relationship that, in the way you believed it existed, never actually existed. And you are allowed to mourn that. You are allowed to mourn the years, the energy, the parts of yourself you gave to someone who could not receive them as the gifts they were. And here's what I want you to know about thriving, because the culture has cheapened this word, and I want to give it back to you in its real weight. Thriving after narcissistic abuse is not a performance you put on to spite them. It is not a revenge body or a curated social media life or a louder voice in the room. Thriving is the slow, sometimes invisible, deeply internal process of becoming a person whose nervous system is no longer organized around someone else's moods. It is the return of your own preferences, your own intuition, your own creative impulses, your own capacity for joy that does not need to be justified